It was Mark Twain who famously said, "It's not the parts of the Bible I don't understand that bother me, it's the parts that I do understand." Now, I'm not sure this passage would fit into that category. Oh, it fits into the category of being a passage that bothers us, but I doubt that for many it would fit into the category of being a passage that we understand. Now, we don't understand a passage like this any more than we understand similar passages in the book of Daniel, or even the entire book of Revelation. I think it is fairly safe to say, though, that even if we don't understand it, we do find it just a little bit scary. I would like to suggest, though, that this is a passage that shouldn't scare us, but rather fill us with comfort and with hope. I'd like to suggest that this isn't a passage about the end, or even the beginning of the end. Now, I think it is more about the end of the beginning. In fact, if you want verification that this is true, you need look no further than the very beginning of Mark's Gospel. For Mark opens with these words, the beginning of the good news of Jesus Christ. Now, what he is telling us is that his book isn't the whole thing. He is telling us that his book is merely the beginning. And now we are coming to the end of that book. And we have to remember where we are in Mark's Gospel. Jesus has just entered Jerusalem during Holy Week. We are in the last days before the crucifixion. In fact, this passage in Mark would correspond to the passage in John that is known as the Upper Room Discourse. And what makes this passage unique in Mark is that it is the only extended teaching of Jesus in the entire book. Now, Matthew, Luke, and John mention several other great teaching moments within the life of Jesus. But Mark's Jesus only slows down his action-packed ministry long enough to teach with such thoroughness in this one single place in the 13th chapter. Now, for Mark, then, there must be great significance to this instruction of Jesus on the Mount of Olives in response to questions that his disciples were asking. Because, you see, the verses that we have read this morning are a mere snippet of everything that Jesus says here. If you have one of those red letter words of Jesus Bibles, you see that from halfway through the 5th verse of this 13th chapter, it's all Jesus. It's 32 verses in a row, and it is nothing but the words of Jesus. And they are words about wars, and earthquakes, and famines, and false prophets. Then is it any wonder that we find these things frightening to us? No, but again, I would suggest that these words aren't really words about the end, but rather they are words about the end of the beginning. For again, remember where we are. This is Jerusalem in the final week before the crucifixion. In Mark's Gospel, this is the last opportunity that Jesus has to speak important words to the disciples. Now, he knows the fate that lies before him. He knows that he's not going to get out of Jerusalem alive, or at least before he is done. And he knows what that means to him, but he also knows what it means to his followers. He knows how frightened, how confused, how devastated they will be in just a matter of days. Now, these are words of assurance that even in the midst of the fear, the confusion, and the devastation, there is something more to come. This is not the end, but it is the end of the beginning. On November 10th, 1942, in the midst of World War II, Winston Churchill addressed the British House of Commons. After crushing defeats at the hands of the Germans, there was finally a glimmer of hope for Great Britain and its allies. And Churchill, after repeating his famous words about never promising anything but blood, tears, toil, and sweat, then said, "This is not the end. It is not even the beginning of the end, but it is perhaps the end of the beginning." You see, in the midst of fear and confusion and devastation, he could see a glimmer of hope. And isn't this true of our own lives as well? So often, life is simply a matter of our perspective. Remember the story that Ronald Reagan always said was his favorite story? It's a story of two brothers, one an incurable pessimist and the other an incurable optimist. They were taken by their parents to see a doctor. They wanted this doctor to cure them of their respective conditions. And the physician started with the young pessimist. He took the boy into a room that was filled with a mountain of new toys. And he said, "These are all yours," to that boy. And immediately the little boy burst into tears. "And what's wrong?" his dad said. And the boy said, "Well, if I play with these toys, they're probably all going to be broken and ruined." And then the doctor turned to the young optimist, and he took him into another room, and it was filled not with a mountain of toys, but with a mountain of horse manure. He said, "This is all for you." And that little boy jumped up and down, and he ran, and he jumped inside that pile of horse dung. And he began digging around, and his father and the physician were just stunned. And the dad finally said, "Son, what in the world are you doing?" And the boy popped up from the middle of that horse dung, and he said, "With all this horse dung, I figured there's got to be a pony in here somewhere." He said that Ronald Reagan told that story so often that when anything went wrong around the White House, someone would inevitably say, "There's got to be a pony around here somewhere." Now that's not meant to make light of the real pain and the real heartache of life. It's not meant to minimize the agony that must be endured during difficult times of life. And yet I think these words of Jesus and what we know as Mark's little apocalypse can help us see beyond the pain, beyond the heartache, and beyond the agony. And they can help us look at life with a different perspective. They can help us see that difficult experiences are often not the end or even the beginning of the end. Often the most difficult experiences that we endure are but the end of the beginning. For Jesus tells the disciples to stay awake, to keep alert, to be aware. I think he is talking to them more about daily living than he is about the end of time. He is telling them to be ready to live. He's telling them that the pain that lies before them, the fear that engulfs them, the despair that threatens to overwhelm them is fleeting and it is temporary. In the midst of these words that we just read this morning, Jesus says, "Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away." And the peace and the promises of God will outlive all of the atrocities, all of the wars, all of the famines, and all of the earthquakes. And the peace and promises of God will outlast all of your own heartaches. You know, I think that's why Jesus spends so much time with his disciples on such a serious matter, so very close to his own death. It's as if he's really saying to them, get ready for some tough times. Get ready for pain and heartache and disappointment and grief. Things that you never before imagined. It's coming. Be aware. Be prepared. Be alert. It's coming. But he also assures them that there is something greater that stands beyond all of the heartache. So they can't see it now, but it's there. They can't comprehend how they will ever get through to the other side, but they will. The same is often true for us as well, isn't it? For every one of us here today knows something of pain, something of heartache. And for some, the difficulties are far greater and last far longer than for others. For some, life seems to be little more than a series of tragedies, one just following upon the heels of another. And I think these words of Jesus are meant to assure us that those difficulties are never a signal of the end. And they can serve more accurately as the end of the beginning. I think of the real experiences of life that bear this out. The loss of John, the end of a relationship, the death of a loved one. All of those things are painful, excruciatingly so. And in one sense, they are markers of an end. Something has been terminated. Jesus calls us to be alert, to be on the watch, to stay awake. Because, as he says, there is more to come. Now, those experiences can be not an ultimate end, but merely the beginning of something greater that God has in store for us. But it really largely depends upon our perspective. I will know people who have a tendency to turn everything in life into bad news. There are those who are miserable when everything seems to be going their way because they know that the bubble's going to burst. They figure whenever you're on top of the world, there's only one way to go, and that's down. They always expect the toys to break. Their view of life is that when you are there at the top, you're going to fall. Now, those same people will take a bad experience, and then they will conclude that all of life from that moment on is probably going to be lousy. You know, I think what Jesus is telling us about those bad experiences is they're going to happen. And he's also saying, don't panic. The end isn't really the end if we view it properly. For every traumatic experience in life can serve as the end of the beginning. There's something more in store for us. Don't give up. Don't give in. Don't panic. Great song by the British rock band Coldplay, and that has that as its title, Don't Panic. Now, those words are never heard in the song itself. It's a song that begins with an utterly depressing sound and equally depressing lyrics. Bones sinking like stones. All that we've fought for. Homes, places we've grown. All of us are done for. Now that moves immediately from those sad words of resignation to the chorus, which says, we live in a beautiful world. Yeah, we do. Yeah, we do. We live in a beautiful world. And back and forth, those lyrics go from sad resignation to uplifting hope, almost as if the singer is battling with himself, struggling to determine which outlook on life he prefers. And the end of the song gives the answer. Oh, all that I know, there's nothing here to run from, because here, everybody here's got somebody to lean on. And that, I believe, is why it's called Don't Panic. So it is for us. We all need to have someone to lean on. Now, during those experiences when it seems as though the end is upon us, when it feels as though we will be consumed by tragedy and heartache, standing next to us, along with others during those times of trial, is one who calls us to be alert, to be awake, to be prepared, and even in the midst of sorrow, to live. As Jesus stands at our side and assures us that there is something beyond our own trials, in the same way that there was something beyond his, the empty tomb, and new life stood on the other side of the cross. And what looked like the end was really only the end of the beginning. And so it is for us as well. There's got to be a pony in there somewhere.